It's a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us. This evening, we're happy that we are going to be discussing education, something that's very important to us as a people, as a church, as a nation, and for ASI, the Adventist group of businessmen, service professionals who have ensured that we have gathered here this afternoon to make this discussion something of national importance. This evening, we are looking at education, from crawling to flying. It's an interesting premise. It was Alvin Day who said, if caterpillars can fly, so can I. They crawl first, then they fly. But it's a beautiful metamorphosis that allows that. It was Henry Brougham who, in his presentations to Parliament, in ensuring that the plight of slavery was made in the consciousness of the people of England, who said, education makes a people easy to lead, but difficult to drive, easy to govern, but impossible to enslave. We know that education is one of the main pillars for us to grow as a nation and to be part of a world stage where we can excel. So this evening, we're happy that you could join us. For those who are watching live on the ASI YouTube platform, on the EJC Live platform, on Facebook Live, on PBCJA Live, or any other platform that you're joining us on live or delayed, we're happy to have you. And we welcome your discussion, your comments, your questions as we go forward with this evening's program. To start right, we have none other than the president of East Jamaica Conference, Dr. Eric Nathan, who will bring us greetings. Dr. Nathan, over to you.
It is my joy this afternoon to bring greetings and to say prayers on behalf of the President of Jamaica Union. Shall we bow our heads for prayer? East Jamaica Conference is proud to join with the ASI East Jamaica Conference. And so it is my joy to bring you greetings on behalf of the administration of East Jamaica Conference. It is not by coincidence that the Seventh-day Adventist Church finds it necessary to provide this platform for discussion on the research of Professor Orlando Patterson on the theme, the topic, transformation of education system in Jamaica. This research finds itself as a part of the mandate of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It fits into the philosophy of the Seventh-day Adventist Church because we believe that education and health are two of our divine responsibility. The Seventh-day Adventist Church recognizes that with education, one can communicate with the great Creator, the omniscient one who created this world. It is true that the only part of the human being that can connect with the divine is the mind, and that is through education. And we agree with one of our pioneers, Ellen G. White, when she wrote in her book, Education, she says that true education has to do with the harmonious development of the physical, mental, and spiritual powers. We believe that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And it is for that reason why the philosophy of the Seventh-day Adventist Church says every church that we have should be a church where we have a kindergarten school preparing our students to go to the next level. And we are proud of having over 27 high schools scattered across the landscape of Jamaica. Many prep schools, and we have a number of schools that will be taking our children from kindergarten right up to university. And we are proud of Northern Caribbean University. That is the flagship of the Seventh-day Adventist Church Re-Education. And so it is my joy to, on behalf of East Jamaica Conference, to partner with individuals like Professor Neville Ying, Dr. Lincoln Edwards, President of NCU, and we have some of our young educators, Moham Singh. We are happy to have Mrs. Carol Edwards, Mrs. Carol Robertson, the rector of the Cable and Wireless Group. We are privileged this afternoon to have with us from the Ministry of Education, Dr. Clover Hamilton Flowers. And she represents the Ministry of Education. We are very happy this afternoon for this opportunity to use our platform, the EJC Virtual Church, as the means of transmitting this discussion about education. And I hope that at the end of this discussion, we will get greater insight of how we can deal with some of the challenges that we are facing in our education system. As Seventh-day Adventists, we believe that education makes a man in connection with his divine creator. The mind is the only part of the body that can communicate with God. May God bless you, and I hope at the end of today's sitting, Jamaica will be better off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Nathan. We have online with us none other than the President of Jamaica Union, Pastor Everett Brown. He will now lead us in prayer. Pastor Brown?
Thank you so much. Let us pray. Gracious Heavenly Father,
okay.
We thank you for this moment, for this opportunity that you have given to us to participate in
So we are moving right along.
national
And we are going into
development. We thank you for the ASI East Jamaica Conference chapter, for Elder Thomas, and the panel that we have brought together to discuss
and we're going to try to make it as
national issues. The Education Transformation Task Force was established, and the report has been presented. And this evening, oh God, we have assembled a very erudite panel led by Professor Ying. We pray your blessing on them. We pray your blessing on the education sector. We pray, Heavenly Father, that out of this discussion this evening, we would be more informed as to exactly the way forward where education is concerned. May you bless each panelist as they share with us their responses. May the information that we garner this evening will help us to make those decisions that will advance the development of this nation, we pray. In Jesus' name. Amen.
The Jamaica Education Transformation Commission was launched in July 2020 by the Most Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Andrew Holness. That committee was charged with conducting a comprehensive review of the public education system, covering all sectors of education, namely early childhood, primary, secondary, vocational and higher education. That committee was chaired by none other than Professor Orlando Patterson. The report was handed in to the Prime Minister, or a draft report was handed in January of this year. Our education system is one of the largest in the island, comprising over 7 regional offices, employing 25,000 teachers, and educating more than 500,000 students. Who else could we ask to speak on the issue of educational transformation by ASI, but none other than Professor Neville Ying. Professor Ying has been a tower in the education system in Jamaica. He has distinguished himself in the career, having served as professor and head of the Michael University, as well as several other entities. He's been lauded. He has authored several books and articles. Professor Ying has such a career which spans more than 50 years. We were honored to have helped him launch his book on servant leadership, and we're much more honored to have him again today, speaking on the topic of educational transformation from crawling to flying. Our presentation this evening will involve him speaking on the issue, and then we will also have him coming again, responding to questions that you will pose. So please, we ask you to send in your comments through the chat or send us directly online. You may have other medium that you can share it with. And we will ask Professor Ying to answer it. Later, we will also have a panel of professionals in education who will help to discuss with Professor Ying other aspects of educational transformation. But now, please help me welcome Professor Neville Ying.
Greetings to everyone, and let me join the moderator in welcoming persons from Jamaica and in the diaspora globally. For some of you, it's good afternoon. Some people, it's good night. And for some other persons, it's good morning. But wherever you are in the world, we want this afternoon to engage you in a very robust discussion on one of the most important areas that affect Jamaica's development, which is the field of education. Let me begin by giving you a synopsis of my presentation, and I'll do this in 2 parts. First, I will focus on the main purpose of the presentation, and then I will present arguments to set the stage for my recommendations. At the end of that, we'll take a short break, and then I'll come back and speak to my recommendations, and then the panel will join us, and then we'll also have a robust discussion on this topic. Education is the most important factor for achieving sustainability and resilience of our country. It's because of that why we're here this afternoon, because education deals with the most important aspect of our society, which is people. Therefore, the main purpose of the presentation this afternoon, this evening, or this morning, wherever you are, is to focus on this area. What I will do is I will share my perspectives. As they say on a popular sports program, these are my views, what are yours? So that is what we want to do. We want to excite discussion nationally and internationally on what is happening in Jamaica and how we move forward with this important process of education transformation. What I would like to do is to ask you to be engaged in 4 different types of conversations. The first one is a conversation about vision. What will this transformed education system in Jamaica look like in the future? So first of all, you have to have a mental image of what this looks like. If you're constructing a building, you'd get the architect's impression or the artist's impression. The same thing I would like everyone to do, to start to take a look in the future, what a transformed education system in Jamaica would look like. The second conversation I would like us to be engaging is what we call creativity conversation. What are the creative ideas that you all have that we can put forward to assist in informing how we move forward, how we set strategic goals for transformation, how we set strategic actions that we're going to take? Because it's no use we set the goals and we don't have actions. So, the other thing is, what critical success factors are we going to put forward so that we know that education transformation achieve what it wants to achieve? The third type of conversation that I've invited everyone to take part in is what we call relationships. How we build trust and how we build team spirit around getting everybody involved in education transformation. And lastly, I encourage you to get into what we call an implementation conversation. It's no use we have all these great ideas if we have an implementation deficit. So those conversations must be around who is going to take responsibility for delivering the actions and the objectives that we set. To facilitate all this, I will put forward my recommendations, and the purpose of putting forward my recommendations is really to provoke discussion. So it's not that my recommendations are necessarily the right ones or the ones that you must agree with. What we need are contending viewpoints, but at the end of the day, we must have some consensus about how we move Jamaica's education system forward. Just to whet your appetite for that section, I'm going to put out provocative questions like, how do we align education with economic growth and job creation? The next thing we want to put forward is, what should we do about the Ministry of Education? In other words, do we need to reform the Ministry of Education itself if we are to get education transformation? The next thing is, we need to take a look at all the councils and committees that the ministry has set up. Are they doing what they are supposed to do? Are they overlapping in their functions? The next thing is, how do we move persons from, say, the primary schools to the secondary schools? And how do we move students from secondary schools to universities and colleges? How do we address things like the digital divide? And I'm very happy that you have panelists from Flow, because one of the big cries in Jamaica now is you only have internet connectivity if you are in the rural areas. Sorry, if you are in the urban areas. The people in the rural areas are crying out. How can we get involved in this technology age if we don't have reliable internet connectivity? So I want to talk a little bit about that. The other thing is, how do we place students from primary to secondary schools? And I have some views about that. The other thing is, should we link salary increases to the outcomes of transformational efforts? So in institutions, should teachers get a raise of pay if the institution is not delivering on the transformational outcomes? Should government set a target for all tertiary education institutions to become financially self-sufficient? That's just to whet your appetite when I come to that section. Next, I will put forward, as I said, some provocative questions and then invite everybody to participate in that. So I'll start by positing that disruptive forces are going to be the main drivers of education transformation in Jamaica. The impact of disruptive forces on the economy and jobs will in fact be the main drivers. Now in Jamaica at the moment, we are focusing on two disruptive forces. One of them is COVID-19 and its variants and what impact it's having on jobs, the economy, and also the mental health of our people. We're also focusing on exponential changes in technology. Now we have to deal with things like artificial intelligence, blockchain, big data, and nanotechnology. But while we're focusing on those things, I'm encouraging everyone to realize that there are two other disruptive forces that we need to pay attention to. One of them is global warming and climate change and all the things that it spawned from it, which is hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, droughts. The other two that we need to pay attention to is what we call global crises, which result from the fight for supremacy, for economic power, for nuclear energy, and for technology. Now, the war in Russia at the moment between Russia and Ukraine is a stark reminder that we must pay attention to this fourth area of disruptive forces. The impact of all of these disruptive forces on our people pose both opportunities and challenges for education transformation. So flowing from this, we must point you to the fact that transformation will require us to focus on three elements. We must set ourselves transformational goals, strategic transformational actions, and critical success factors if we're going to move forward and be certain of where we're going in this process. The two most important critical success factors, from my point of view, are to have what we call empowered leaders, both in the Ministry of Education and in all our educational institutions across Jamaica. The next is that we must have predictable and sufficient financing to implement all these laudable goals and objectives that we're going to set. So, in setting out the roadmap, we must have those three elements in place. Now, the other thing is, to remind you, is what I call the cardinal principle for transformation. And what is that cardinal principle? The cardinal principle is that transformation is about radical changes, not about small incremental changes. So let me illustrate what I mean by that by drawing an example. Each year, we go through the ritual of comparing our students' performance, those percentage of persons who got grades 1 to 3 in CXC exams. And we focus on things like, 3% increase or 5% increase. That's what we call small incremental changes. What I would like us to focus on are large changes, like having a 40 to 50% increase. That's what is going to be dramatic change to make sure that we have transformation in the education system. So that is what we mean by, if we focus on small incremental changes, Jamaica is going to be crawling. If we focus on large and radical changes, then Jamaica will be flying. So what we are comparing ourselves with is the caterpillar. If you look at a caterpillar, what does he or she, if you know what sex a caterpillar is, doing? You watch a caterpillar crawling. And then it is transformed into a butterfly, which flies around with all its splendor. That's where we would like to take the Jamaica education system. From crawling to flying high and beautiful. One of the catalysts for doing this is to start focusing on what we call the international ranking of our education system. And one of the methods of doing this is to enter our students at the secondary level in what we call the PISA examinations. And PISA means the Program for International Student Assessment, which actually ranks countries across the world in terms of targeted areas like English, mathematics, and science. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, first of all, we enter our students? And wouldn't it be more even wonderful if we transform our system, that Jamaica becomes one of the top 3 nations in the world in English, mathematics, and science. That's the vision I want us to focus on. The next thing we need to do as a starting point for transformation of our system is, first of all, to move what I call psychological hurdles in the system. And what do I mean by that? The first hurdle I would like us to remove is the classification of our schools as traditional and non-traditional. Those terminologies and nomenclature, what they do is they create feelings of inferiority and superiority across the system. We need to drop those words from our lexicon in education. The next thing we need to move as a psychological hurdle is the a priori intention that no student can get full marks or an A. Some people mark like that in our system. CXC has tried to do that by introducing what is called criterion reference examinations. But even after that, we still have some grounds to cover. Some people are still saying no student can obtain full marks or get an A. We need to remove that psychological hurdle from the system. In addition to that, we have an education philosophy which says we test students to find out what they don't know instead of trying to test to find out what they know. The other important psychological hurdle we need to remove is the stigma that is attached to technical and vocational education and training. We must change our mindset and our practice that technical vocational education and training are just for students who are just good with their hands and not with their brains. We need to change that. And despite the fact that CXC has tried to introduce some new subjects, now, instead of talking about home economics, we now have family and resource management. We have food and nutrition and health. We have textiles, clothing, and fashion. And in industrial technology, we have building and furniture and mechanical engineering. The Hart Trust NTA, they are graduating chefs who are world class. They have persons graduation from Hart NTA who have superior skills in information communication technology. But despite all of those laudable efforts in our system, we still have residues of the stigma on technical vocational education. And what probably are some of the things we can do to change that? One possible solution is to make sure that the requirements for doing a technical vocational education subject is to make sure that the students are also excellent in English, mathematics, and science. The next thing we can do is to make sure that students leaving the early childhood up to primary system are facile in 6 basic skills and literacy. So we have to make sure that by the time they get to secondary school, they have basic literacy skills, basic numeracy skills, basic writing skills, basic skills in oral presentations, but most importantly, they must be literate. They must have what we call now digital literacy and scientific literacy. So now instead of the conventional way we look at literacy, we have to add to that the important aspects of digital literacy and scientific literacy. In fact, the rapid acceleration of digitization at the workplace requires that across the nation, we need to bring the entire workforce up to date with digital literacy and scientific literacy. The next part of my salvo for educational transformation is that educational measurement and evaluation are going to be the driving forces of education transformation. And what am I putting forward? What we tend to stress in our schools nowadays is achievement tests. What I'm proposing is that we need to expand that to have a more expansive and integrative use of a multiplicity of psychometric measures, aptitude tests, personality tests, emotional intelligence surveys, intelligence tests. And why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because we have to look not only at the academic performance of students, but also their psychosocial developments. So, for instance, when we focus our education system on personality measures, we are looking at dimensions like self-confidence, self-esteem, self-reliance, work ethic, and ethical behaviors. Personality measures will help each of us to answer important questions such as, what are my areas of interest? What excites me? What motivates me? What is my attitude to life and living? What is my center of influence when I interact with other people? Aptitude tests will help us to determine if students who are leaving, let's say, our secondary schools, are fit for purpose for the workplace of the future, because it's going to help us to predict performance in the future. Intelligence measures will cover a wide range of things such as reasoning, verbal, spatial, and mathematical reasoning, problem solving, adaptability, which are competencies that are going to be needed in the workplace of the future. We're all emotional beings. Emotional intelligence measures how we pay attention to the emotions that we have. I'm getting emotional about this. How we manage our emotions. How we understand the emotions of other people. How we deal with a diversity of people that we meet with our own emotions and theirs. And how do we use all of this to build and maintain relationships among people? So, your EQ, which is your emotional intelligence quotient, is as important as your IQ, which is a measure of your mental capacity as compared with your age. And so, what I'm recommending is that in our school system, we must start to teach, and especially in our teachers' colleges, we must focus on what I call the 4 domains of emotional intelligence. And those 4 domains are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship building. We should also focus on what we call the 4 I's of emotional intelligence: idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. And in the discussion, we can expand some more as to what all of those mean. So in sum, what I'm really saying is that in the system, we must have a multiplicity of these measures. And what will these do for us? So for instance, they will help us to transform the lives of our people, especially our students. And what will this transformation of their mindset and their attitudes be? It will allow them to find alternative pathways to crime and violence. It will allow them to make better decisions about should we have vaccination for COVID-19 or not. What lifestyle changes should we have to deal effectively with non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, and also communicable diseases such as HIV and AIDS. The application of psychometric measures, and a variety of them, will help teachers to shape their teaching learning methods and modalities to include multiple methods of teaching to cater for all these different needs of students in the system. So, I'm really glad to see that when the National Education Inspectorate goes out to inspect schools, if you look at 5 of the 8 criteria that they use to assess schools, 5 of them actually deal with the personal development of our students. The next thing I spoke about was us achieving international ranking for education system. So let me move on to another area of ranking that we need to pay attention to in this transformation effort. What COVID-19 has taught us is that there is a symbiotic relationship between health and education. And so, some of the measures that we need to use in the transformation process for education has to be the international indices that are used to measure those things. So, we have to pay attention to the Human Development Index, which is put out by the UNDP, and also the Human Capital Index that is put out by the World Bank. So, having set that stage for my recommendations, I will now invite you to take a short break, and I will come back and speak to my specific recommendations for the transformation of the system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ying. That's quite a few recommendations that you've made for us. I heard about the 4 I's. I heard about looking at international rankings. I also heard about how we can deal with financing. I saw several nods of persons who are in studio with us. And also, I expect that we will be seeing quite a few questions on the chat. Professor Ying has brought his experience to the discussion, having served for at least 10 years in senior positions at the Ministry of Education. He served on several task forces related to education, as well as serving in corporate. With Professor Ying, you know that his recommendations will have maximum effect, but also will take the attention of persons who are in the system as well. We have a few questions for Professor Ying. I noticed that persons would want a little bit more emphasis on the 4 I's, and we'll ask him to deal with those when he comes back. We also heard about the connection with STEAM, the science, technology, engineering, the arts, as well as mathematics, and how emotional learning and emotional intelligence can actually fit in with education. That's always important in this time where we have to ensure that our students not only are academically qualified, but they also have what it takes to deal with the emotional side of things, the social side of things. We want to hear a little bit more about how culture can weigh in on how it is that we connect with education of our children. Our children come from various backgrounds. We come from various types of families. We also come with an experience that's brought about by different family members and the impacts of the communities in which we live, inner city versus rural versus other urban or full urban. So we want to ask Professor Ying about those impacts and what they will have on the transformation of the education system. But before we ask Professor Ying to return, we have some special music for you.
Today a man is somewhere proclaiming the good news, bringing families to Jesus all around his neighborhood. He tells them that God is able to make their house a home. He wants to win his world for Christ, but he can't do it alone. But each one can reach one. As we follow after Christ, we all can lead one. We can lead one. message is unchanging. Go into all the world and share the love of Jesus far away or door to door. You see, just like somebody told you that Jesus loves you so, you must tell someone who will tell someone until the whole world knows. For each one can reach one. As we follow after Christ, we all can lead one. We can lead one to the Savior, and together we can tell the world that Jesus is the way. If we each one. So will you go and labor? Will you hold high your light? One by one and two by two, we can win our world for Jesus Christ. Each one can reach one. As we follow after Christ, we all can lead one. We can lead one to the Savior. And together we can tell the world that Jesus is the way. If we each one reach one.
Always beautiful. None other than Daniel Cox. Thank you so much, Daniel. We heard from Professor Ying just a few minutes ago, and just to remind you, he was speaking about some of the elements that he believes would be essential for the transformation of our education system. He mentioned having a vision. He mentioned about financing. He also mentioned that we can't just do small incremental changes because we will be constantly crawling. To have great changes, you want to have some very radical changes to our system so then we can fly and really fly. So we welcome again Professor Ying.
Thank you very much, moderator. So now that I've set the stage, I'll move into my recommendations. The first I would like everybody to remember is that we actually have 3 transformation reports. So let me just reiterate them for you. The first one is called the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force Report of 2020. The second, and that was chaired by the Minister of Finance, which is Nigel Clark. Then you have COVID-19 Labor Market Task Force Report 2021, which was chaired by me. And then you have the Jamaica Education Transformation Commission Report, which was shared by Professor Orlando Patterson. These reports are inextricably linked. So just to give you an idea, the COVID-19 Economic Task Force deals with areas like economic growth and job creation, productivity improvement, and education and training. The COVID-19 Labor Market Task Force deals with areas like the acceleration of digitization of the workplace and working remotely from anywhere, productivity improvement, education and training, social protection and social safety net, ILO labor standards, conventions and decent work agenda, and our national labor laws. The Jamaica Education Transformation Commission report deals with the transformation of our entire education system as well as its component parts, early childhood education, secondary and tertiary level education. The pervasive feature of all of these three reports is the importance of our human resources. And that's why we are talking about education transformation today. Because when you look across all those reports, nothing can happen except we focus on our people. And so that's why my first recommendation is that we must implement all three reports simultaneously. That's the first big takeaway point I would like you to remember. Because of that, I'm also recommending that other education and training efforts must also be linked to those three reports as well. We have training programs for the National Identification System. We have special training programs going on for areas like coding. We have special education and public education programs going on for crime prevention. All of these should be linked together in one big national effort. In fact, by focusing on all of those simultaneously, it gives us the golden opportunity for all, especially government ministries, departments, and agencies, to work collaboratively to achieve this education transformation that we're talking about. The next big recommendation for me is that education transformation must use what we call an organizational transformation approach. So, for instance, in other areas of my work, when I go into an organization, we do what we call organizational transformation. The education system is no different from that. And that usually starts with a fulsome analysis of something. The first fulsome analysis that I'm recommending is an analysis of the characteristics of the workplace of the future. Now, even in the Education Commission report, they did not have time to go through the impact of COVID-19 and the characteristics of the workplace of the future. So what I'm recommending is that first order of business is to now pay attention to, because when you look at the characteristics, and I can speak a little more about them when we come into this discussion session, but there are some very important characteristics which the education transformation must address. The next thing is we must do a more fulsome analysis of all the transformational initiatives that we have tried before. And what I'm recommending is that we take a look at the period 1954 to 2020. And why I go back there is that actually I was alive and well during that period and actually was involved in some of those transformation initiatives. And the question we want to ask is, what impact did they really have on the three pillars on which the education system rests? Access, equity, and quality, and especially the pillar of quality. The next thing we want to know is, how can we use all of these to develop metrics to determine what is the return on social investment, and also what is the return on overall investment in education. So this assessment should point us to what should we do differently this time around. The next thing it should point us to is the answer to a very important question. What is the real game changer for transformation in our education system? Is it education policies from the ministry, or is it the transformational efforts of leaders in our education institution? Very important question. It will also help us to determine, or should help us to determine, what is the financial model that we should use to finance education going forward. What should be the model for early childhood financing, primary school financing, secondary school financing, and tertiary education financing? Also, the next thing we should do is focus on three things. One, the transformational goals. Secondly, what transformational actions to achieve those goals. And thirdly, the critical success factors that will determine all of this. So let me take the first two. My recommendations for the transformational goals and the strategic actions I have put these out in 7 categories. The first category is that they must be aligned to economic growth and job creation. The second thing that they should do is look at the area of governance and administration. Thirdly, institutional transformation. Number 4, student performance and progress. Number 5, research, development, and innovation. Number 6, quality assurance. And number 7, education ranking. Let me give you some of what I call my big ticket recommendations for each of those that I mentioned. So first of all, let me take the area of alignment with the economic growth and job creation. In sum, we must prepare students in our education institutions to be fit for purpose in the workplace of the future. One of those areas must be having sufficient internationally certified graduates that can match investment that is going to provide job opportunities, especially job opportunities at the highest skill level, at the higher job paying level. And that means that we have to focus on some very important competencies. And some of these areas are going to be critical and divergent thinking, complex problem solving, what we call mental elasticity, entrepreneurship, adaptability, and agility. And also the 6 areas of basic skills and digital and scientific literacy that I mentioned earlier. The next thing is that we have to make sure that we harmonize science, technology, engineering, and mathematics with technical vocational education and training. Those are my big ticket recommendations for the first year. On the governance and administration, my first big ticket recommendation is that we should repurpose and streamline the Ministry of Education. Lots of debate is going to be about that. Second recommendation is that we should establish an independent body to drive the education transformation. And thirdly, we must conduct an organizational review of all the ministries, committees, agencies, councils, and regional offices. We must develop and implement a method for assessing the transformational impact of leaders at the Ministry of Education as well as leaders in our education institutions. And 3 areas that I recommend we should assess those persons on are strategic thinking, emotional intelligence competencies, and conversational competencies. And we can have a discussion around those. Next, I'm recommending that we increase the number of regional school boards. We don't have enough talent around to have a large number of individual school boards. So I want to put that out there for discussion. In the area of institutional transformation, my first big ticket recommendation is that we must focus on what is called holistic education, which really deals with the development of the total person. So the teaching learning process must impact the total individual. The next important big ticket item, and I'm leaving out some of these because we're going to have them in the discussion session. We need to use a combination of physical and digital infrastructure. I would love to see all our primary and secondary schools become what I call digital learning and culture and information centers, which will be used not only by the schools, but their community stakeholders. The next one, of course, is to remove the digital divide across rural and urban areas for different age groups, because now what we're going to have is from Generation Z to baby boomers and people like me. And so the digital divide has to address the digital needs of that entire range of age groups. We need to conduct an intensive in-service and pre-service teacher training program One of the things that COVID-19 pointed out to us is that our teaching profession are not really ready for some of these new teaching modalities. So, we have to build their capacity to really deal with holistic education, STEM, the use of multifaceted psychometric measures, and all the range of modalities from face-to-face to virtual to hybrid. Then we should have a special education program for parents. What COVID has done, COVID-19, is that parents and students are now in the same physical location. What we want is a program that will make that interaction between parents and students be more mutually beneficial. I'm very pleased to note that the Jamaica Broadcasting Commission, together with Heart Trust, NSA, NSTA, and the National Parent Teachers Association, have just launched a technology-related program for the training of parents. We need to build on that. Very commendable move. The next thing is about student performance and progress. My first major recommendation there is, of course, we must start make greater use of what I call school-based assessment based on multifaceted psychometric measures. Next, we must make greater use of what I call a scholastic aptitude test combined with SBA for satisfying the matriculation requirements from secondary schools to our tertiary level institutions. On the number 5, which is the research and development and innovation area, I'm recommending that in each tertiary institution, we should have a research and development and innovation center. And what should that center do? It should focus on outputs that are of value to both the public, private, and social sectors. Most importantly, they must become sources of income to support themselves as well as to help to finance their parent institutions. And why do I say this? I say this because financing, that's one of the beauties about my work in both in education and in the private sector. One of the things I learned from that cross training and experience is that lofty goals are only paper except they have money to implement them. And all the organizations that have led financial self-sufficiency, and I can tell you about them in the discussion section, I've actually had the privilege and opportunity to actually create financial self-sufficiency in Jamaica, in both the public and private sector. So I know what I'm really talking about. Why do I mention this? Education transformation is going to be a business opportunity. And that's why I mentioned earlier that in our tertiary institutions, and especially in our teacher education institutions, we must include emotional intelligence and conversational competencies. Why do I say that? When we get the gear going high in education transformation, we're going to have all kinds of packages from abroad being offered to Jamaica for sale. What should we do then? We must create our own learning packages. If you take a look at one of them that I saw in the report that was put out, it's called SEL. I don't know if you all remember that. If you add another L to that, what is it? Cell. But what does SEL mean? It means social emotional learning. And what did they really do? All they did abroad was they took the 4 domains of emotional intelligence, which are, if you remember them, being a teacher, I like to repeat what I said. The first one was what? Self-awareness. Remember that? The second one was self-management. The third was social awareness. And the fourth was relationship management. And all those researchers abroad have done is to use those 4 categories to create learning packages. If you don't believe me, go on the net and put in SEL, learning programs, and you'll see a plethora of them. And I can bet you they're going to be offering them for sale, especially for early childhood education. So what should we do in Jamaica? Get ourselves ready to produce those ourselves. We have the skills, we have the competencies, and if we make them an integral part of, say, our teacher education institutions, that's when we will provide funding to fund both our research and development institutions, or centers, and also the institutions in which they lie. Quality assurance, that speaks for itself. Every tertiary institution must try to achieve institutional accreditation. In the case of early childhood education, all early childhood institutions should strive to be registered by the Early Childhood Commission. In the area of education ranking, as I said earlier, we must set ourselves a target that in the next 3 years, we must be in the top 3 countries in the world in English, mathematics, and science. Now, let me give some ideas about the 4 critical success factors. The first one, as I mentioned, is that what we're going to need in the system in order to have this education transformation is empowered transformation leaders at the Ministry of Education as well as in each of our education institutions. But in order for those leaders to work effectively, you must have a second critical success factor, which is called a risk management system or a risk management culture. If you don't have that, people are not going to be willing to question the status quo and say what we're doing is not the right thing, because they're afraid to come out of their comfort zone and to really question what we're doing. So creating this risk-taking culture is going to be a very important critical success factor. We spoke about international ranking, so that is the third critical success factor. Financing. As I said before, we must have predictable and sufficient financing. And what are some starting points? The first starting point is, and I'm throwing this out for discussion, both by you and the government. So here's my idea, for instance. If we take all the teacher training and teacher education institutions, finance them for the next 5 years fully, and give them the target of 5 years to become financially self-sufficient at the end of 5 years. But in order to do that, you must give the centers some kickstart funding. And that funding can be a combination of government, private sector, and international funding agencies. Next, introduce a proper national credit transfer system so that when you move from one level to the other, you can get credit. It reduces the time you have to take to do your degree or diploma, and it reduces the cost. So let me conclude my part of the presentation by throwing out to you what I call 10 provocative areas for you to consider in our discussion session, both in the chat, in the panel discussion, and then after today, nationally. The first one is we should marry STEM and TVET. And we can talk a little more about that. The second one is that servant leadership is going to be the key for education transformation. I can have a robust discussion, and ASI, remember that they were very kind to launch my ideas about servant leadership right in this room last year, September. So I can spend an entire evening talking about that, but I won't do that today. The third area is that we should replace sixth forms by community colleges strategically placed across the island. Lots of discussion on that. The fourth one, I know Dr. Floor is going to comment on this, cease using the standard curriculum out in the primary schools. Instead, let them focus on what transformational outcomes they should try to achieve. Lots of debate about that. Number 5, have a new approach for moving students from primary to secondary schools. What we should move to is using school-based assessment based on multiple psychometric measures to move students from primary to secondary schools. Love to hear some ideas about that. Next, the movement from secondary schools to colleges and universities should be based on a new scholastic aptitude test that we should develop ourselves, as well as school-based assessment. The sixth one is special funding arrangements for tertiary education institutions, and I've already mentioned what we should do for teacher education. Number 7, we should license all professional educators. All members of the education profession should be licensed, and they should do at least one refresher course each year to maintain their license to teach. Number 8, leadership and management. Anyone who is going to be appointed to be the head of any education institution must first of all complete a specially accredited program in 3 areas: transformational servant leadership, corporate governance, and financial management. Number 9, compensation should be linked to achievement of transformational outcomes. And number 10, there should be a partnership between tertiary institutions and the business sector to use big data to create business opportunities. If you can show that you have the capacity to help private sector companies to make more money, to satisfy customers, and to be sustainable, that's how you're going to get funding from them. Thank you very much. That's my presentation, and now I put you over back to your moderator and a question and answer on the panel. Thank you.
Two roads diverged, never to meet again. And if I had to do it over, I would still choose the path I'm traveling. The road gets rocky and my steps are unsure, but I am secure. I will endure. Get weary from my journey, so I sometimes roam. But the Savior is familiar with every forge in the road. It seems the higher the ground, the longer the way around. Still I'm heavenward bound, so I'll be taking the long road home, where the view is best. 'Cause on the long road home, there will be time to stop and rest. I don't regret for one moment, just taking my time. 'Cause I'm traveling with a friend, and his company's just fine. Whether it's day or it's night, I'm never alone on the long road home. I feel like the only traveler as far as the eye can see, but I'm following a voice speaking so clearly to me. 'Cause climbing up the mountain may bring me dismay, but the view of the valley keeps taking my breath away. There's a spirit inside that is not of my own, giving me determination, new strength in my bones. With every step I obey, the closer to him I stay. As I'm walking it day by day, so I'll be taking the long road home, where the view 'cause on the long road home, there will be time to stop and rest. I don't regret for one moment, just taking my time, 'cause I'm traveling with a friend, and his company's just fine. Whether it's day or it's night, I'm never alone on the long road home. Didn't bring me this far to leave me alone, but he's all I need on the long road home. On the long road home, where the view is best. On the long road home, there will be time to stop and rest. I don't regret for one moment taking my own sweet time, 'cause I'm traveling with a friend, and I know that his company's just fine. Whether it's day or it's night, I'm never alone on the long road home. Ooh, on the long road home.
Thank you very much for that lovely song. So now we are going to continue with our discussion forum here at our education forum. And our panelists this evening are Professor Neville Ying, you heard from him earlier. We also have Dr. Lincoln Edwards. He currently serves as the president of Northern Caribbean University, and he has also served as a grant reviewer for the American Heart Association Western States affiliate. Beside him, we have Carol Robertson. She's the Director, Government Enterprise and IT Solutions at C&W Business Jamaica. And in her current role, she's responsible for enabling the technological development of government and enterprise organizations. We also have Dr. Clover Hamilton Flowers. She is the Assistant Chief Education Officer, Curriculums Unit at the Ministry of Education and Youth. And in this position, she has focused on curriculum design and development. And on Zoom, we have Zondre Mohan Singh, and he is from Clarendon, and he is currently a doctor. And he serves as the Western region at the Cornwall Regional Hospital as a medical intern. Also on Zoom, we also have Clayton Hall, if I can find his bio right here quickly in my tangled web of papers. Yes, he is the past president of JTA. Yes, Professor Ying, thank you. And he served as the youngest president of JTA, and that was in 2012. And he is currently the Deputy Secretary General of the Jamaica Teachers Association. All right, Professor Ying, let us start with you. In your presentation earlier, you covered a range of issues speaking about credit transfer systems, STEM, etc. But before we get to that, let me get some opening remarks from Dr. Edwards. Let's hear your thoughts currently on the state of education in Jamaica, and I'm sure you'll be speaking about the tertiary sector since you're a part of the NCU.
Thank you, Andrea, and good evening to everyone, to your listeners online. Jamaica is at a critical stage of its development, and the education sector will play a critical role as we move towards first world status. The published report by UNESCO has indicated that for a developing country to sustain development, 40 to 50% of its population should have access to tertiary education. In 2005, 2006, according to the Patterson Report, the Education Transformation Report, in 2005-06, there was only about 29% was the rate. And then the Education Sector 2030 Committee looked at that and wanted a 33% increase. And that was to happen in 2010 to go up to about a little over 38%. Well, that did not happen. And in 2017, the rate was 28.5%. And at the time of the writing of the report, the rate was 27%, which is what exists now. So you see that we are not making the kind of progress we need to in moving our people to be enrolled in tertiary education. And part of the challenge is that the government system alone cannot tackle that problem. So private educational institutions must be a part of the conversation if we are going to increase the rate of enrollment of our students in the tertiary sector so that the country's developmental goals can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Edwards. Dr. Hamilton Flowers, your opening remarks.
I would like to take this opportunity to say thanks to Prof for what he would have shared with us. But I want to just bring to the fore the importance of us stepping back a little to examine what it is that we really believe about education. If we are not careful, it is that each of us would bring a different perspective. What do we really mean by transformation? What do we really mean by reformation? And there are various constructs that we would bring into our conversation. In light of all the reports, we're seeing the need for us to be on the same page as it pertains to what exactly is education, what is really happening, and how do we individually contribute to what is happening, and how can we individually help to bring about the change. As I read various reports, as I listen to various conversations, even today, I found myself thinking about a growth path. This is simply saying that for everyone, every person, every member of our society, it is that we need to be on a growth and developmental pathway. All of the recommendations are pointing to the need for us to have that kind of environment that would support the holistic development of each person. And even as we are going to be working together to help with development, it must be that there are boundaries that will guide us. It must be that we are all on the same page. I'm reminded of the curriculum, the National Standards Curriculum, and a lot of the recommendations are pointing to the fact that the curriculum is so designed that we can help with the development of all of our students. The link between assessment and curriculum cannot be ignored. The challenge has been we have not been faithful to implementing the curriculum like we should have. Will that make a big difference if we were to give it a try? I think so.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton Flowers. Ms. Robertson?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And I bring greetings, first of all, from our Vice President and General Manager, Mr. Stephen.
All right, just hang on a second for me, please, Ms. Robertson, so that we can ensure that all the persons who are watching on YouTube and those listening to us can hear exactly what you have to say. And you're the Director of Government Enterprise and IT Solutions at CW Business Jamaica. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. All right. I was beginning by bringing greetings to the forum from our Vice President and General Manager, Mr. Stephen Price. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this very important discussion. I do want to take a few moments just to share with you some thoughts, some comments, some data, information from the technological side of things. A lot of the conversation thus far has been very, very interesting, very pointed very essential and timely conversation. So my contribution here is basically on the foundation, as we said just now, what is transformation? Transformation takes place on many levels, and as we get more and more into the digital age, and we talked about the digital divide, the technology, the underlying technology that is available to us is going to be essential to the execution, the implementation, as Professor Ying had spoken about, of this. So I want to share some information with you. So according to learning and leadership expert and author of The Innovator's Mindset, George Couros, technology will never replace great teachers. But in the hands of great teachers, it is transformational. At Flow, we've employed a multiplicity of methods to ensure that the most appropriate technology is in the hands of educators and is available to students to facilitate learning. We understand the critical role that technology, and specifically internet access, plays in national development. And as such, our role as one of the country's main providers of telecommunication services is not something that we take lightly. We understand that despite these efforts, many individuals remain unconnected, and much work is needed to bring them into the technological fold. We are certainly up for the challenge, and to address these issues, it will require partnerships among stakeholders across both the public and the private sectors. Governments worldwide have stepped in to support communities that are still disconnected from the digital world, and we have seen elements of this in various forms in different countries over the years. We applaud the efforts of our own government stakeholders and invite a more cohesive partnership with us to connect more of our people. We are here to work with the government as well as community to design the best approach to connect even more Jamaicans and to achieve Jamaica's ICT vision and goals. The issues of accessibility and affordability, we see local industry players that have expanded their networks to further bring more access to Jamaicans. For Flow's part, we have significantly ramped up our network expansion program. To put it into context, now listen carefully. Approximately 700,000 households in Jamaica have electricity. Our fixed network currently passes approximately 650,000 of those homes. Of those households across the country, we are passing 650,000. These homes have access to fixed voice, to internet, and in most circumstances, cable TV services. We also have made investments in our mobile network that deliver LTE broadband speeds to hundreds and thousands of Jamaicans at the most competitive rates in the country. In fact, 97% of our population is covered. We spoke earlier about urban areas versus rural. What we're looking at is where the population is, and we cover 97% of the population with our mobile network. However, in many cases, the issue isn't so much about availability or access to broadband, but rather the affordability of it. Compared to other English-speaking Caribbean countries, Jamaica's gross national income is low. For example, Jamaica's GNI is $4,620, compared to Barbados, which is $14,460, and in the Turks and Caicos Islands, it's $37,700, and in Trinidad, it's $15,410. Notwithstanding, our fixed and mobile broadband prices in Jamaica are among the lowest in the Caribbean. Governments worldwide have used public-private partnerships to bridge the digital divide and increase broadband adoption. There have been various approaches that consider investments directly in ISPs, internet service providers, investments in national network infrastructure, and social programs that support accessible and affordable connectivity. We have examples of this, how this has been done in the US and in Latin America, and some have been very successful. So Flow has been developing solutions to bridge the digital divide in Jamaica in accordance with our core social mission, which is to connect everyone to the internet irrespective of their income or where they live. For this, it's a necessary investment for us. While countries have various programs to support their most vulnerable community members with basic needs such as food, housing, and transportation, we believe connectivity is now an essential service that must be supported for those in need. Technology has allowed for more realistic tracking and monitoring of students, progress by both teachers and parents. Such resources also allow for greater synergies between teachers and parents. Schools can use data analytics. We spoke about big data. Schools can use the data analytics to monitor students' performance, look at patterns, make projections, and design targeted interventions to mitigate against challenges from the onset. Curricular electronic textbooks, and other resource materials can be updated much more quickly within the digital space, rather than with the chalk and talk teaching model. This enables educators to quickly adjust teaching materials to meet the needs of the students as the world evolves. There is an increase in focus on self-paced learning and an exploratory approach to education, with students now being exposed to online learning. Conducting additional online research by reading journals and watching videos on YouTube is today's equivalent of reading ahead, and students can do so more effectively due to the wealth of information available online. Technology has enabled education, which can save students time and money, as they no longer are required to commute to the physical classroom or even the library. Now, let's not speak anecdotally. Let's look at some numbers. Over 254 primary schools across the island are currently provided with free internet service courtesy of Flow. We continue to support through our Flow Foundation. By providing this service at no cost to schools, we have foregone over $60 million in revenue annually. We've also upgraded internet that we have provided to schools at no cost to the institution. We also continue to support the government's One Laptop or Tablet per Child initiative. And in 2021, we partnered with various organizations to donate hundreds of tablets, and will continue to support this initiative when the second tranche begins later this year. In 2020, we connected several priority schools, specially selected by the Ministry of Education, youth information, at no cost to the institutions. So in over 150 years of existence, Flow has invested billions of dollars in the building out of the country's island broadband network. We continue to increase our investment in the expansion of and upgrading of the network year on year, and continue to grow our subscriber base. In fact, in 2019, we invested over $300 million in our infrastructure and helped grow the growth, support development, and resulted in a robust economy for the benefit of our citizens. Over 500 communities have already been connected to our fiber network since January 2020. This means that tens of thousands of Jamaicans now have internet access at home for the first time. The investment has been critical, especially due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, as learning no longer takes place in classrooms, but at the kitchen table, and in study nooks at home, and in a plethora of other locations. With the support of our corporate partners, we took the decision to offer our Flow Study educational platform free of cost to our nation's children, regardless of their service provider, through to July 31st, 2020. Approximately 59,000 students were able to complete their studies for the previous school year by utilizing the platform. Under our partnership with the Ministry of Education and one-on-one educational services, we also facilitated data-free access to live remote classes and free full syllabus coverage for grades 1 to 13 from March 23rd to July 3rd, 2020. Over that period, we had a total of 48,101 users, of which 44,000 were students. So some parents did access the service as well. Almost 60% of the students accessing the platform were from mobile devices. Additionally, we provided free exam preparation workshops for students sitting the CSEC and CAPE examinations in 2020. One of our early commitments at the onset of the pandemic was to zero-rate websites used for the education purpose. Under this initiative, based on information provided by the Ministry of Education and educators, we zero-rated over 100 websites, foregoing revenue to ensure that students were able to access the required resources for online learning. We also provided low-cost prepaid and postpaid unlimited mobile plans to further enable access to online learning. We also made the plans easy for students to access. All they had to do was call our contact center. Additionally, we continue to deliver free digital training to Jamaicans across the country so they can learn about the online digital space, learn new skills, and upskill themselves by taking advantage of many opportunities in the digital space. This is a part of bridging the digital divide. Currently, over 8,000 Jamaicans are enrolled in our Free Skills for the Future program and our Free Training for Professionals program. So I've shared a lot of information with you, but I've shared it so that you can see what work has been going on to really provide a strong entrance into this discussion and to the discussions that will go forward. Flow is committed to education, as we are committed to supporting our government of Jamaica, and we are ready to partner with all stakeholders to make a great future for our children. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Robertson. And now we're going to go across to Zoom, talking about Hume, to Zoom to listen to Zondre Mohan Singh for his opening remarks.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the privilege of serving on this esteemed panel this evening. As I'm sure is quite evident, I'm probably the youngest and one may argue the most inexperienced person on this panel. However, it's really a privilege to be here because of the unique perspective that I offer to this discussion. I represent a group of youngsters who we are either pre-COVID trained during COVID, or some persons who are just commencing their training now in the almost post-COVID era. But one thing is for sure is that we bring a new perspective. We bring an experience that I'm sure a lot of others may not be able to relate with. However, our experience is the now. It is the current reality. And as a result of that, we really do appreciate the approach that not just ASI, but certainly all the partners and stakeholders in this initiative have taken to creating solutions for this education system in Jamaica. I must admit that we're quite frustrated with what obtains currently. The presence of systems that are not outcome driven. By and large, the systems in our education, or the subsystems within our education system, are really either slaves to tradition or the products of inaction, having gotten recommendations in the past that we just have not acted on. And as a result, those who have been trained in my era have seen the inefficiencies of the system, the inadequacies that obtain, but certainly we come armed with recommendations and a unique perspective so we can move towards solutions for this problem that I think is quite ubiquitous. So in a sense, what I'm saying is that I agree with the approach to allow us to work together, fresh minds along with experience and wisdom, that mature wisdom that comes from our more experienced members on the panel. And we can move together with a futuristic thought process so we can create outcome-driven solutions to this problem. So I implore you, as we have this discussion moving forward, to not have a closed mind, but to be okay with us making out-of-the-box recommendations, because as Prof said, there's no way we're going to make a transformation with small incremental changes. We must be willing to make that massive leap. So our approach, in essence, will take we'll have three major components. We want to focus on building systems that are outcome-driven and that add real value to the economy and to the training of our workforce. We want to, number two, adopt methods of delivery that are suited to the current landscape. And three, we want to focus on holistic development. I think if I can champion the cause for these three tenets of our solutions moving forward, then the voice of our young people will be sufficiently represented here. So let's have a chat.
Thank you very much, Zondre. Clayton Hall, your opening remarks.
Thank you kindly. Colleagues, good afternoon. It is indeed my pleasure to join with you this evening. And I must say, I am esteemed to be on a panel with the person who called my name the best I've ever heard it called at my graduation from Jamaica way back then. But I would also, on behalf of the presidents of the Jamaica Teachers Association, bring greetings to this panel and indicate that we are, as an organization, committed to the enhancement and improvement of education in Jamaica in any form that it may take. I, like Martin, way back then, have a dream. And it is a dream that the concept of the haves and the have-nots will not just be a reality for us, but will be relegated to being the name of a sitcom on this US television station. Because the fact is, the exigencies of the last 2 years, COVID realities, have in fact created a significant disparity between the haves and the have-nots. The outcomes of our educational sojourn over the last 2 years is positively correlated to the socioeconomic status of the learner. We have not been able to create a playing field that is level. And we have seen that our education system, with all its flaws, have in fact been able to mitigate against the issues, especially those people who have low or weak socioeconomic realities. From the Orlando Patterson report, the Teachers Association is of the view that there are quite a number of issues that we need to ventilate. We want to start at the base of education, early childhood education. I believe the suggestions made are significant. But one thing that the average Jamaican really doesn't know is that early childhood education was really left to the private hands. It was left to church and private schools. Oftentimes, these started on the verandas of persons who were not necessarily teacher trained. And, well, many of our students, especially at that foundational level, did not have the benefit and still do not have the benefit of being exposed to trained teachers and a formal curriculum. The union will acknowledge that within the last number of years, we have seen significant steps forward, and the Ministry of Education ought to be congratulated on that. But like Professor Ying said, and as was stated in the Patterson report, these incremental steps are positives. However, if we are going to take this bull by the horn, we need to move away from incremental steps. We need to ensure that each child in Jamaica at the early childhood level is exposed to a trained teacher in a formal curriculum so that there can be learning opportunities provided. Because if you know about learning, you will realize that if the information or the concepts are taught in error, it is more difficult to unlearn and relearn rather than if they were taught in the correct way from the beginning. Regarding the matter of the professionalization of the teaching force, the licensing of teachers, the union is in full agreement with licensing of teachers. What we differ on is really the modus operandi. And one of our major issues or challenges is that we believe that licensing should be a quality assurance mechanism. And you will understand that if your employer is also the licensing agent, then there may be economic realities towards licensing outside of professional development or quality assurance. And that is a situation we really need to work out. The matter of school management is also a matter that must come in for serious consideration. Many of these school managers have been left on their own. And when I say left on their own, many schools survive because of the ability of the administration to fundraise. Who knows who and who is able to get? We believe that there should be at least a minimum amount of funding to each institution on a per capita basis. We have heard the comments regarding the quantum of spend for each child in Jamaica. And that quantum of spend is pegged to GDP. Our reality, our belief, in fact, our knowledge is that the quantum of spend when used as a factor of GDP does not give the correct picture. It does not give the correct information. Because what we would want you to determine is the per capita spend for each child. How much will it cost to educate this child at the primary level for a year? Not what percentage of GDP is being spent on education. Because I say it all the time, if Mr. Leachin and I went to the supermarket, he could spend 0.5% of his earnings on food and it would last him for the year. And if I spent 50% of my earnings on food, I may still not, or I certainly would still not be able to purchase the amount of food that he spent, he purchased. And as such, to consider purchasing or spend as a percentage of GDP is really giving a false picture of the quantum of money that is spent on each child. My panelists from Cable and Wireless spoke to the index regarding Jamaica and a number of other territories within the Caribbean. If they spent even a lower percentage of their GDP on education, they certainly would outspend us significantly because they are significantly ahead. And we have to recognize that if we want to compete in that game, we have to get there. The final thing I would say in this segment is that in addition to the three core areas that Professor Ying pointed out, that would be a requirement for the training of our principals, it is the view of the union that we should add industrial relations training to that mix. Sometimes it is significantly unfair to principals based on how they become principals. Great teachers get promoted to being principals. However, when they are appointed, you realize that what they are required to manage is significantly above and beyond academic management, which is what is the primary focus of the principal. Principals will now have to be caught up with not just financial management, but fundraising management. How do you market your institution to attract funding? Because funding becomes a primary factor or function. Fundraising become a primary function of what the principals do. We want to not only train principals in industrial relations management, but also include and augment the human resources of the institution with some other skill sets that we believe are necessary and practical if you are going to transform our educational institutions into futuristic organizations that meet children where they are and take them to where we want them to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clayton Hall. Now we're going to go into our question and answer session. I'm going to start with Professor Ying. Now, the Patterson report outlined that Jamaica has a severe learning crisis in that the majority of students at the end of primary schools remain illiterate and innumerate. But in your presentation, Professor Ying, you took issue with aspects of the standard curriculum in primary school. What changes would you like to see in the curriculum at that level, and how will it help in improving the numeracy and literacy skills?
I think the major point I was making was not the curriculum itself, but focusing on outcomes. And remember that I mentioned like the different skill areas that we should focus on. In other words, especially from early childhood to primary school, some critical outcomes are the 6 areas that I mentioned. One, of course, being basic reading, writing, and presentation skills. And I've added to that the whole area of digital literacy and scientific literacy. And that's what I mean by focusing on the outcomes. not so much on the curriculum itself in the schools, because one of the other points I want to make in that comment is that we also want to encourage creativity in the schools. I remember when I started teaching, and my colleagues know I like to tell stories, the first thing I found out was that it was the syllabus that was important. The first thing I found out was that I had to attract the interest of the children. Now, here I was presented with a class that was told that they had to repeat the year, they were no good, and they believed it. So I spent 4 weeks of the term having conversations with them to build up back their self-esteem, to see themselves as people that are capable. The next thing is, and this was very frightening to my principal, I said to him, I'm not going to teach a syllabus for 3 months. I'm not going to give you a lesson plan either. And he said to me, you're a brave young man. I am going to allow you to do that, but deliver me at least 90% pass rate at the end of the year. And I took it on. And I divided the syllabus into principles and concepts. Because in mathematics, if you can teach people principles and concepts that go from primary school straight to university, that's the most important thing. Next 3 months I spent on the syllabus. And the third 3 months I spent on teaching them how to do exams. What was my pass rate? 96%. The point is that he allowed me to display my own creativity. That's the point I was really making. And yet deliver the results, the outcome that was needed. So I'm not arguing against the syllabus, I'm arguing or the curriculum. I'm saying allow creativity and creatives in the school system.
All right, Professor Ying, let me put this over to Dr. Hamilton Flowers. What initiatives are being taken to improve the numeracy and the literacy of students in schools via curriculum? And if you could respond to Professor Ying's point about infusing that aspect of creativity, is there any leeway for teachers to do that?
So we understand that the curriculum is basically a guide. And we would have recommended for our teachers to be creative in using the curriculum. So as it pertains to how they will do so, there would be, for example, certain boundaries in terms of ensuring that you're catering to all of the children. Now notice that what Professor actually said is that the learners came to him with a particular profile, and that's where we normally say to teachers, start with the profile of your students. We have to examine children's readiness. And in terms of readiness, we are not confining readiness to be just those cognitive skills. We're also talking about interest. We're talking about the background. We're talking about a variety of attributes of our children. Now, once we get the information in terms of profiling the children, as a teacher, you have the autonomy to look at the curriculum to see how you can extract from that ideas to help you to shape the experiences that you'll be having for your students. So note that Prof said it's not about the syllabus. He's not speaking against the syllabus. But again, you would notice that he actually said he took the time to look at it, made a decision as to how he would be working with his students. And I could give stories too in terms of working in a situation in which students were asked to focus on a particular curriculum, but in looking at the profile of the children, these students, and the prospects for them, it meant making some adjustments. That room is there. However, as he would have said, at a particular point in time, he would be expected to move his students from point A to point B. And while he never said how, I think he would have won their confidence sufficiently that they would also take responsibility. They would also be owning that learning process for themselves and playing active role in the process. And that's what we're also saying when it comes to implementing the curriculum, use assessment data as evidence and engage with the students in shaping that plan, because the students can also help each other in terms of achieving the objectives. What are we doing at the ministry? We are providing support, we are monitoring, we are coaching persons, we're providing support resources, and we're also open to those conversations with various stakeholders to help to develop our teachers and also to shape interventions. So right now we're also looking at interventions to help with students' development, psychosocial support for our students, as well as for them to develop in terms of literacy, numeracy, and also for them to be grounded in their identity and also develop spiritual intelligence.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton Flowers. Now to you, Mr. Hall. Professor Ying in his presentation made mention of the licensing of all professional educators, and in your presentation you said you're not opposed to the licensing of teachers. What you're opposed to is the modus operandi, and you think it should be a quality assurance mechanism. What exactly would the JTA want to see in terms of the licensing of teachers? How will this quality assurance mechanism work?
Thank you kindly. I would, however, like to also posit a comment on the matter of the primary curriculum, because the primary curriculum teaches one thing and tests another. We must recognize that the end exam or the culminating exam for primary school is not an aptitude or an achievement test. It is in fact a placement exam. So its aim is to ensure that the preferred spots are given to the students who can get the better grades. So from that standpoint, you realize that there is less focus on achievement and attainment in what the exam is teaching and more on how you will get a better grade than your counterpart, and as such be prepared or be chosen for a preferred space. Because we have a feel in Jamaica that a weak student in a good school has a greater likelihood of performing well than an average student in a weak school. So the alignment of the curriculum and the test is something that ought to be looked at. On the matter of licensing, the teachers' organization we do welcome the idea of being licensed. We want to see a body created which would ensure that professional standards are upheld. We want to see that body guarantee or somehow seek to revolutionize the view and image of teachers as professionals within the society. And fundamentally, we believe that that can only be achieved if there are professionals doing this professionalization. And what do I mean by that? The body that seeks to make this profession more professional can't be non-professionals. And when I say non-professionals, I would want you to recognize that we have a blueprint that seemed to have worked in Jamaica. We have the legal council, we have the medical council, we have the nursing council, and they are all operating. And as far as I am concerned, they are doing well. We would want to see the teaching council patterned in similar manner to guarantee and to ensure that the individuals who are making policy decisions on behalf of teachers are themselves teachers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hall. And we could dissect a number of issues there, but we have to move the discussion along. Now, Dr. Edwards, you made mention of the private education sector being part of the debate when it comes to tertiary institutions. What does the private sector, in terms of tertiary schools, what do you want to see? What support do you need from government or other non-government organizations?
Well, thank you, Andrea. There is no question that the private institutions have played a key role. Mention was made earlier about the haves and the have-nots. if you take, for example, an institution like Northern Caribbean University, we came into existence at a time when only the children of the elite and the rich could afford access to tertiary education. But through a number of initiatives, we became the engine and the emblem of a revolution to provide access to students who would normally be refused by traditional systems. Even in our high schools, we have had students joining high schools in our system in their 20s, mid-20s, getting a start at life that traditional systems would not have allowed them, and they have gone on to do well. So I am recommending that the government looks at the private education system where vast numbers of Jamaican students choose to follow their educational pursuits and partner with those institutions, providing them with grant support in critical areas, and also ensure that these institutions continue to play the critical role that they do. If, for example, there is an institution that is excellent in a particular area, I believe that it is in the interest of the country that the government supports any area within any institution that is providing excellent training. So that way, we provide the best persons to the world. In addition to that, we have to remember that the persons who have access to tertiary education are more likely to receive jobs. And it's not just an economic matter, because according to the Patterson report, the person leaving high school the unemployment is about 40%, whereas one leaving a tertiary institution is about 19.9%. So that it's not just an economic matter, but it's also a social matter. People who have access to tertiary education are less likely to be involved in crime, and they play a greater role in the social life of their communities and help the institutions to do better. So there are lots of benefits. So all of our institutions, not just the government institutions, but the private institutions, must be part of a conversation where some basic support is given, and then they can take it from there. And that is what I am recommending.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Edwards. Zondre, let's go to you. You're a young person. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing from students in the tertiary sector while you were at UWI and in your interactions? I'm not hearing Zondre. I realized he was trying to speak. Do we have him now? Will we be able to hear him now? I do hope so. Let's try again. Zondre, your response. That's the common problem. All right, we'll get back to Zondre in a bit. Let's go over to you, Ms. Robertson. You spoke about Flow's efforts to roll out broadband so that more persons can get access. In your research and investigations, what are some of the challenges to persons accessing internet connection, and is there a strategy to help them overcome that?
Thanks for the question. Yes, so we've consistently worked to improve our rates of coverage, and as I said, we've made quite a bit of inroad, covering 650,000 of the 700,000 approximately households with electricity. The challenges that we face are not necessarily in the deployment of services and the attempts to make services accessible, but it's really in terms of keeping the service available. And why does that occur? We still have quite a bit, I would want to say too much, vandalism happening on our plants and in our infrastructure. That is the primary issue, vandalism and theft, that compromises the quality of service that we are able to deliver when we do achieve our coverage goals. Now, the issues are obviously vandalism is the destruction of property. We've got the theft of property. And theft, another one we think of is electricity. So we do have, whenever we have an outage, we are dependent on electricity. But we do also have backup and backup power sources in our plants. But those also get stolen. The fuel that is needed to keep those plants running gets stolen, the batteries get stolen, and in some cases we've actually seen the entire plant be removed. And we've seen that happen, we've replaced. So we are committed, we continue to replace the resources when we lose them, but this is something that we have not yet been able to abate. We lose resources due to burning of debris, burning of the cables themselves, debushing exercises where the fauna will fall on the cables and damage them. And we also suffer a lot from overladen vehicles as they traverse our roadways. They will pull down cable. So we're committed to keeping service up, running, but you will appreciate that there is time and financial resources that are required to keep the service up and running. So what's required? I mentioned in the opening comments our desire for partnerships. These partnerships, I spoke a lot about partnerships with the Ministry of Education over the years, and particularly during the onset of COVID, to get students connected, keep them connected, and provide access to resources. We also need partnerships with the rest of the government in terms of our national security efforts, in terms of our judicial system. The theft of cable is still a predial larceny. The penalties for stealing cable are woefully wanting, if I can use those words. It really does not parallel to the impact that we are seeing from the actions. And so we have provided a lot of support to review the legislation with our own legal teams and to make recommendations. We just need to see those implemented. And I'll end by just leaving a thought. In my mind, certainly, the damage that we experience, we have an absolutely solid network. There's no doubt about it. But it's only as solid as we can protect it. Now, I want us to start thinking about cable damage and cable theft as cybercrime, because the net effect is that we are affecting our ability to access cyberspace, which is going to translate to our education, it's going to translate to our healthcare services, it translates to our economy as we are able to conduct daily business. So at that level, and as cybercrime gets more mature, there are a whole host of other implications to it. But at the foundational level, if you cannot connect, there is little else you can do. And the more we get into the reduction of the digital divide, the more crucial that infrastructure becomes for our country.
Okay, thank you. An argument there for the theft of cables and vandalism to be treated as cybercrime.
Yes.
Interesting. All right, Zondre, let's get back to you. If we may just go back quickly to the issue of tertiary education. I was asking about some of the challenges being faced by students when they, in fact, are able to access tertiary education. What are some of the challenges that they face, and what would you like to see implemented to help the children to overcome that, or the students, rather, to overcome that?
All right, thank you so much. I think that's a question that absolutely needs to be dealt with from the perspective of as broad a base as possible. Now, I went to the University of the West Indies. That's where largely my experience was confined. So perhaps my experience is not entirely generalizable. However, I can say that from my interactions with individuals from different or from other institutions, these issues that I'm about to posit seem to be quite general and quite applicable to their experiences as well. And right off the bat, at the top of it, would be access to the things they need while in university that's being inhibited by the absence of funding. Now, basically what I'm trying to suggest is that getting into university and being able to pay the tuition is one big headache that you have to go through. But having done that, there's still a lot more that needs to be funded that sometimes we don't pay attention to. And it's those little things that add up that I think we need to focus on as well. Even if we may not be able to make tertiary institutions, completely financially self-sufficient within 2 or 5 years. Certainly, if we start on that path that Professor Ying has suggested, then in 5 years, we'll certainly be better off than where we are now. So the recommendation there is just to take into consideration making these institutions more financially sustainable so that they can make education more affordable for those of us who sojourn there. So that's the first one. The second one, and perhaps equally important, is our almost obsession with random metrics that seem to not be really useful in the real world. And for those of us who recently completed a degree anywhere, we may have that sense of disconnect between what we were taught in school and what is actually useful in the real world. Now, take my word if you'd like, or reflect on your own experience if you'd like, but I'm sure there were a lot of things that you had to study that you found to be absolutely useless when you went into the real world. Now, I'm not suggesting that we'll always be able to predict what is useful, but a more strategic approach to creating and curating curricula that are suitable to creating individuals who are excellent for the given field that they will be serving, I think is very, very important. There's also a challenge with the almost obsession again and praise of a toxic work culture. One where not much effort is put into preserving one's mental health. Not much effort is put into ensuring you have a balanced approach to education. Now, this is a religious or semi-religious context within which we speak, and certainly many of us here are familiar with the implications of ensuring that we have a balanced approach to education, not sacrificing our mental or physical health for the sole purpose of achieving these vanity metrics, for want of a better expression. Now, a challenge with that is that we end up creating individuals who think that they're best suited for the workforce if they work the hardest in their class. And for those of you who've been in the workforce for a while, you realize that is not the reality, because the studies have shown over and over that those of us who are best able to balance our personal lives with our professional pursuits tend to be the ones that create systems that actually move the needle forward. So I would recommend that when we're creating or curating our curricula, we focus a little bit more on the holistic development of our students and not just on getting in the 99th percentile in our various classes. Another major issue that I'd like to point out is again a focus that is unevenly spread across the different fields of study offered. And a praise again for traditional occupations and courses of study, with almost a detest or a condescension towards the ones that may not be your traditional occupations. Now, I can imagine, you know, I might look like a hypocrite. I went to school and studied medicine, so what am I talking about? But even us will see that the disparity that exists between how persons who are pursuing the traditional medicine and law and nursing and teaching are viewed as academics versus those who are pursuing more vocational areas of study is real. That disparity is quite real and quite unfortunate, because if we're being, you know, 100% honest with ourselves, we'll realize that a lot of these other professional areas or these other career paths may, on an individual basis, push the needle further as an economy than a given doctor or a given lawyer may be able to. So if we could somehow encourage a removal of that stigma attached to pursuing more creative career paths, you know, what of the fashion designers and the social media influencers? What of the persons who are creatives at heart? The entire orange economy. Where is the social commendation for persons who would like to pursue academics in those areas? And where are the courses in our institutions that encourage these persons to take a very academic and strategic and research-driven approach to doing well in these fields? So some of the issues that we're facing were outlined just now. I'm sure that we could find a lot more. But again, if we can focus on holistic development of our trainees, keeping in mind that metric that is useful for the workforce and not just created to rank us among our peers, then I think we'd be, leaps and bounds ahead of where we are.
Andre. All right, let's see. And he's getting a round of applause from Andre, you're getting a round of applause from persons here in the studio. All right, let me quickly take some questions from the chat. I think this question would go to Dr. Hamilton Flowers, if you can respond. And this question is from Gavin Lowe. Professor Orlando Patterson, in the report, he indicated that we're not getting value for the money spent. Can you say where the resources have gone?
That will be difficult for me to respond to. I can say, however, that we have been investing resources in the development of our students. We have been doing training activities, we have been providing support resources, even as it pertains to the COVID situation, just working with partners to help to make things happen. So we have been.
All right, I heard you. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Let's go to another question. This seems as if it's coming to you, to Dr. Hamilton Flowers, but I'll go to Mr. Hall, who is on Zoom, to respond to this. Now, there have been multiple reports calling for the revamping of the Ministry of Education. This person was anonymous, but nothing has been done, and the recommendations from the last reports have not been implemented. So I think the question here is, should the Ministry of Education be revamped?
The fact is, the Ministry of Education continues to go through a transformation process. The major concern that we have with education is that we believe that there should be a 10-year plan for education, and that we should have both political parties as well as academia and the technocrats within education sit at a table and hammer out a developmental plan that will not be overturned or removed or replaced every 5 years when there's a general election. What we find is that there is a wastage of resources in doing actually the same thing and calling it a new name. So we have one program or one project that does something, and then there is a change of government or change of administration, and a new project is named. And that new project does the very same thing, but it facilitates the employment of different persons. We find ourselves chasing our tail in that kind of a circumnavigational movement. Instead, we should have a consensus view on education. I think education is too important for it to be on the cut and thrust of the political landscape. We need to determine what we're going to be doing with education, because the results of education is not immediately available. You can't see the outcome of education in 2 years or 5 years. It requires long-term planning and consideration. Let us just look north. Cuba has done significantly well with their educational product because they were able to maintain a particular trajectory for a considerable period of time. I believe if we bring our two political parties, the technocrats within the Ministry of Education and the pedagogues within the educational fraternity, to the table, we can hammer out a developmental, a growth path that will see the small educational budget being put to greatest use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hall. Now we're running out of time, so we have to go to the closing remarks from the panelists. I'm going to begin with you, Dr. Edwards, and if you can just confine your remarks to about 20 seconds, we would appreciate it. Dr. Edwards, beginning with you.
Access is a very critical portion of our discussion today, and therefore I am suggesting that the government provide funding to each student at the tertiary level and allow those students to take that fund to attend the institution of their choice. That will promote competition among the institutions, and students have a choice in where they go. So fund the students, let them go to the institution of their choice.
Okay, Professor Ying, 20 seconds.
Well, I'm happy to see that there has been a sort of consensus on certain points. One, first point I made, go for radical changes rather than incremental changes. Secondly, I think there has been some consensus on using holistic education, especially by the young speaker. And what I didn't hear a lot on, which is really the meat of the matter, is how do we finance education?
So that's another debate for another time, Prof, in terms of the financing. All right, Ms. Robertson?
Okay, I would say we at Flow, for the last 150 years, we have been facilitating the transformation of the country technologically. And in 2022, we remain a partner in waiting. We are here ready and willing to partner to support all initiatives. I would ask that persons help us to protect the very valuable infrastructure that is the network, both mobile and fixed, that supports all of our transformation. And we just remain available.
Okay. Zondre, 20 seconds.
So I'd just like to hammer home the point that we should be looking at the economy of tomorrow and creating systems that will produce graduates who are suitable for the economy of tomorrow, both locally and internationally competitive, and certainly competent in the specific areas that these individuals will be contributing to our workforce.
Thank you. Mr. Hall?
Thank you kindly. I want to go back to where it all begins, early childhood education. He who rocks the cradle rules the world. If we get our little ones prepared and ready for academics and for learning, then the challenge of remediation will be reduced and the cost associated with it will be reduced and the outcomes will be best. Start at the beginning, early childhood education.
Dr. Hamilton Flowers, thank you, Mr. Hall.
The Ministry of Education and Youth is always open to receive feedback from stakeholders. Any proposal that is submitted about initiatives that can help to make a difference, they are always examined, and there is the conversation with the particular stakeholders. As we would have designed a curriculum that caters to the whole student, we are trusting that persons will move away from downplaying the fact of the attainment targets being used to guide assessment and see what can be pulled from assessment information to help to cater to our students.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton Flowers, and thank you, our viewers from Canada, Trinidad, and Barbados, and from all across the world for listening to our Education Forum hosted by the East Jamaica chapter of ASI. To close out this evening's proceedings, we're going to be having a song from Maisha McPherson.
From the highest of heights to the depths of the sea, creations revealing your majesty. From the colors of fall to the fragrance of spring, every creature unique in the songs that it sings, all exclaiming, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. Who has told every lightning bolt where it should go? snow. Who imagined the sun and gave source to its light, yet conceals it to bring us the coolness of night. None can fathom, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable, you've seen the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing, God. You are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable, you place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable, you've seen the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable, you place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God.
We at ASI are very, very thankful to you, ladies and gentlemen, to have sacrificed your Sunday afternoon to be here. The viewing public worldwide, we have gotten feedback from Canada, from USA. People have congratulated all of you for your excellent presentation and feedback. So we really appreciate it. We appreciate it. So we have put together tokens for each person so that you can take it and share it with your families and to say to them, it was worth the while for the time that you were here. So we appreciate the time. And so I'm going to first give the gifts to the ladies. Dr. Clover Hamilton Flowers from the Ministry of Education, we thank you. And I will tell your boss that you did a good job, the minister, all right? All right? Great. And then Lady Carol Robertson, thank you very much. We'll be in touch with you. We are looking partnership at NCU, partnership at ASI. So we are going to ask the president to take your business card because NCU needs some help. So I'm introducing you formally to the president of NCU. All right? Great, great, great. You're spoken. Great. President. And then each person gets two. Then we have Dr. Edwards, President of NCU. Dr. Edwards, we thank you for joining us from Mandeville to Kingston. We appreciate your presence, sir, and we hope that this was beneficial for NCU, and we look forward to further partnership. Thanks. And then we have Prof. Ying. Prof, an excellent presentation. You have dissected this report very well, and I'm sure tomorrow you'll see it in the newspaper. It will be on the news. It's an excellent research, sir, and the feedback you have done. We thank you very much, and we go way back, and we appreciate you're here. And for Zandre, who represented the youth, we want to say thanks to you, Zandre. Your basket and your present will be available, sent to Montego Bay for you. And Clayton Hall, we want to say thank you too, sir, for all the things that you have done. And my co-host now will now speak to the other person that we need to thank. So you want to do that, please?
Thank you so very much, Sir Alfred. It's great to know that we have come to the end of a wonderful program. The reform of the education system, or the transformation of the education system, requires the attention and the involvement of all stakeholders. No matter where you are, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, whether you work in the education ministry, whether you are a partner for education as Flo is, or you are someone who is experienced in the system of education as Professor Ying, Dr. Edwards, a starter like Zandre, or someone who has worked in the system at several levels as Clayton Hall has. We all, as stakeholders, have a role to play in the transformation of our education system. It was Nelson Mandela who said that education is the greatest weapon that we have for the development of countries like ours. So as we leave here this afternoon, I'm very thankful to have been part of this presentation. ASI continues to push on education and topical issues that will benefit us as Seventh-day Adventists, as a country, and as a people. And as we move forward to a world-class education system, we require your help. Every single Jamaican needs to be involved in the transformation of our education system. ASI tells us that there's a place for every single worker in the vineyard of the Lord. There is a place for every single person in the transformation of our education system, whether in financing, as Professor Ying has said, whether it is in helping to chart the vision, whether in helping in partnership. We all have a part to play. My name is Cheryl Pink, and I thank you for having joined the ASI team, as well as the East Jamaica Conference team, the technical team who has been here with us all afternoon, and all these presenters who have given of their experience and expertise. We thank you for having joined us this evening. Do have a pleasant Sunday evening.
We must say thanks to Angela Chisholm from London, and also Cheryl Pink, and also President Nathan for being here, and Pastor Everett Brown, the president of NCU, and the president of the Jamaica Union, for his prayer and support of this program. We want to say thanks to the technical team and to our producer of the program, Lady Adis, for the excellent work you have done. Thanks, everybody, and all those persons out at PBCJ, those persons who watch the ASI YouTube, the EJC Virtual Church YouTube, NCU FM, NCU TV, and the person in Canada, in Trinidad, in the USA, and other parts of the world who watch this program. May God continue to bless you. And those persons in Jamaica, we thank you for watching. May God continue to bless you. Thank you, and have a good evening.